So welcome to our final video in this series on the basic 5 of healthy boundaries for partners of sex and porn addicts. In this video series, we've been walking through the dynamics involved when betrayed partners begin to consider and then establish healthy boundaries. Our first 6 videos in this series talked about the definition of boundaries and then walked through the basic principles of healthy boundaries. In our last video, we talked about the first 3 of 5 steps to discovering and communicating your boundaries with others. In this video, we're going to talk about steps 4 and 5 of those 5 steps. Step 4 is determining your boundaries, and step 5 is communicating your boundaries to others. And just a reminder that we have worksheets that go with these final 2 videos, and you can get those worksheets by going to www.tarkrecovery.com/resources. I'll put a link to that page below in the description, so feel free to get those worksheets and use them to follow along as you go through this video. So in our last video, we did the legwork that's going to help us actually determine what our boundaries are. It's really difficult to know what our boundaries are if we're disconnected from our feelings, wants, and needs. So now that we've reconnected to what we feel and what we want or need, we can actually decide what we're going to do or not going to do to take care of ourselves, which is our boundaries. So in our last video, we also talked about how requests can come into play with boundaries. When our wants or needs can be met by another person's behavior, then we can make those requests to see if the other person was willing to help get our needs and wants met. So when we've made a request, our boundaries may actually end up depending upon the answer to that request, or they may not. So for example, Lucy requests that Jack not bring his computer or cell phone or other technology into the bedroom at night when they're trying to go to sleep. Any boundaries that she has regarding this situation will probably depend on his answer to that request, that he not bring technology to the bed when they're trying to go to sleep. If he's willing to honor that request, then she may not need to have any boundary at all. But if he's not willing to honor that request, then she'll need to determine what she needs to do to take care of herself. This might look like her sleeping in a separate room for a while, or it might look like her getting an eye mask so that she doesn't see the light, or earplugs so that she doesn't hear any of the noise. Or it might look like her going to bed early so that she's already asleep when he comes into the room. And if she's a good sleeper, then she might not be disturbed by the lights or the movements or the sounds from whatever technology he's using. So depending on what her needs and wants are, her boundaries are going to reflect that. Sometimes our boundaries won't depend on the other person's response to a request. So regardless of whatever their behavior is, our boundary is going to be the same. For an example, Debbie discovered once again that her husband's having an affair. She promised herself last time that happened that if she discovered him having an affair again, she would not be willing to stay in the same house with him. She did make a request that he seek help for his compulsive affairs, but regardless of his willingness to seek help or not, she followed through on her boundary by not living in the same house with him at this time. So let's go ahead and use the worksheets to see if you can develop your own boundaries after identifying your feelings, wants, and needs. One page of the worksheets is just devoted to examples of different boundaries that might help you get started as you think about what boundaries are a good fit for you. Because your boundaries are what you will or won't do to take care of yourself and your responsibilities, they may look a little different than what we kind of think of as boundaries in our culture. For example, many partners are surprised to learn that withholding trust is a boundary. When we think of our boundaries as a punishment or a consequence for the other person or a way to scare the person into compliance, then withholding trust probably doesn't seem like a very good boundary. But when our boundaries are about how I'm going to take care of myself and my responsibility, then withholding trust is completely appropriate when trust hasn't been earned. Once you've decided your boundaries, then it's time to decide when, if, and how you're going to communicate those to other people. This is the 5th and final step in the basic 5 of healthy boundaries. So we don't always need to communicate our boundaries to others. This is probably more true when we're talking about internal boundaries or boundaries that don't really have that much effect on other people. For example, I probably don't need to tell the grocery clerk that my boundary is that I'm only going to spend $50 in the store today. She probably doesn't need to know that. Doesn't really make a difference to her. And that's more of a personal boundary that affects myself. Another time that we may not need to communicate our boundaries is if we've already said them. If we've already clearly, calmly, respectfully communicated our boundaries to another person once or twice, then we don't need to say them again. Repeating our boundaries over and over again is not going to make someone hear them and suddenly respect us. So if we have already communicated our boundaries, then it is time for us to stop repeating ourselves and take action and follow through with what we said we were going to do. Having said all that, there may be many reasons why it's important to communicate our boundaries. One is just if I'm going to be acting in ways that's very different than how I have acted in the past with my loved one, or my boundaries are going to have an unexpected effect on my loved ones. Sherry Winston is a sexuality educator. I'll put a link to her website in the description below, but I really like how she talks about, if people are used to walking through my yard day and night, light or dark, and they assume that it's okay with me, and maybe even it has been okay with me, and then at a certain point it's not okay with me anymore, and I put up a fence. Well, it's probably pretty important that I put a light on that fence, so that when these people who are used to walking through my yard in the dark walk through my yard, they aren't going to get hurt by running into a fence that they didn't know was there. So that's a little bit like communicating our boundaries with people who have expectations about our behavior based on our past behavior. If we're going to make changes in that, it's important that we say that out loud. Another reason to communicate my boundary out loud may be that I need to hear myself say it. That for a long time, I have not allowed myself to have a voice. And so it's important to build trust with myself that I say my boundary out loud to another person. Another reason I may want to say my boundaries out loud with my loved one is that I may want to invite my loved one into this process of having a healthier relationship. My boundaries aren't against him or her. My boundaries aren't a secret. My boundaries aren't negative energy toward the other person. They're just how I'm going to take care of myself. And there's no reason why I can't invite my loved one into that recovery process with me. So once you've determined your boundaries and that you do indeed want to communicate these with your loved one, we use the script in the worksheets to help you kind of determine how you would say that. And the script very much follows the same process that we followed for you to determine your boundaries. So it's the same process, it's just you're going to then say it out loud to the other person. So you'll start by letting the other person know what happened and how you felt about what happened. So remember to focus on the one or two strongest feelings that you had so you don't overwhelm yourself or the person trying to listen to you with your feelings. So we used Jackie in our last video as an example. So let's use her again. So Jackie may say to her husband, Ben, I walked into the bedroom and you shut your laptop quickly. And I realized that you were looking at porn again. I felt angry and afraid. So next you're going to let the other person know what you want or need. Jackie may say, I need to be respected in this relationship. And I need to be able to trust you. I want to feel safe and I don't want to keep living through this over and over again. Next, you're going to make any requests that you may have that will help get your wants and needs met. For example, Jackie may request, please get help for your porn use. And or she may request, I need you to sleep in the guest room tonight. And or she may request, get more support for your recovery. So even though some of these are stated as demands or not quite requests, they're still requests because Jackie can't control what Ben does, but she can let him know what behaviors he could change that would help her get her wants and needs met. So once you've made the request, it's okay to wait and see how your loved one responds before you can continue to your boundary. After your loved one has responded, then you can inform them of your boundaries. So Jackie may say something like, Ben, I will be seeking counseling regardless if you go with me or not. Or she may say something like, I need to be separated from you for at least a week so I can process what has happened and how I feel about it. Or she might say something like, my trust in you is broken and it's going to take a lot of time and work before I'm going to be willing to trust you again. So see if you can take your own situation and complete the worksheets. It's okay to actually write the script out on a separate piece of paper and take it with you when you talk to your loved one so you don't lose your train of thought. When you first start using this format for communicating your boundaries, it may feel awkward and uncomfortable. But just keep practicing with it. And the more you practice with it, the more comfortable it's going to feel, the more you're going to use your own words and kind of make it feel more like your own rather than following a format. The more you practice, the more comfortable you're going to get. So establishing boundaries on paper is relatively simple, but as you probably can imagine, in reality, it's much more complicated. Even just trying to get your loved one to sit and listen without interrupting you can be difficult, or even when the loved one does interrupt you, getting caught and going off on a rabbit trail and losing your train of thought is really common. Establishing and communicating boundaries takes a lot of practice, and we often find we run into blocks that kind of keep us from having the kind of boundaries that we want and need. I've said many times in these videos that you don't have to do this alone, and I've recommended getting help. There's several forms of support that you can get to help you establish your own boundaries and maintain them over time, including 12-step groups or other self-help groups that are specific for partners of porn addicts or sex addicts, including therapy from people who are educated about partner betrayal trauma and sex addiction recovery. Or just give us a call or email us, and we're happy to try to get you to the kind of help that would be useful to you. So thank you for joining us in this series of the Basic 5 of Healthy Boundaries for Partners of Sex and Porn Addicts. We hope to see you next time.